Okay, looks a little hazy here. Hold on. Okay. Welcome everyone to Journeys to the Books of the Prophets. Tonight, we are finishing the second book of Kings. And in a sense, we are almost done with this series that began with the book of Joshua. Then we did Shoftim, the Judges, Shmuel, Aleph, and Bet, the first and second books of Shmuel, and the first book of Kings, Malachim, and now tonight we are going to finish the second book of Kings, but there will be another one or two classes because I mentioned that in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, they have extensive teachings about three of the kings that we have dealt with throughout the book of Kings, and that is Achav, Yerucham, and Menashe. And they have amazing teachings. We might even get to it tonight. So we are in chapter 23. We're beginning in the 31st verse. Where we left it was we learned extensively about Yoshiyahu, the king Yoshiyahu, very, very righteous king. The text says that he was almost in a category of his own because of the mass tshuva movement that he led. And this was approximately 30 years before the destruction of the temple. And the text it mentions that even though he led this incredible tshuva movement, it wasn't a complete tshuva movement. There were people who didn't get on the bandwagon, as it were. And he was killed by the Egyptians who were on their way to fight the Assyrians, and they just wanted passage through Israel. And Yoshiyahu did not want to give them passage through Israel, even though the prophet Jeremiah warned him and said, just let them go through. They're not going to bother you. But Yoshiyahu was so convinced that the people were so righteous. There's a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that says that there'll come a time that not even an army will pass through your borders, even if they have no evil intent against you. And he was so convinced that they had reached this level of righteousness. And so he wouldn't let them pass through. They went to war and he was killed. And all of this we learned last week. So where we start is his son, Yoachaz, became king. Yoachaz was 23 years old when he became king. That's where we're starting tonight. And he reigned for 3 months. That was it. And as we've learned over and over again, so we would expect that Yoshiyahu's son would also be righteous. No, says that he also did evil in God's eyes, just like all the previous kings. But that was only in 3 months. And so what happened was the same Egyptians led by Paro Necho. He came back from his war with Assyria, where he was successful. And he basically took Yoachaz captive. and he brought him down to Egypt in exile, and he anointed a king. So we see that Israel's losing sovereignty. Here is a foreign king who puts the king on the throne. And as we're going to see, the destruction of the temple is imminent. And so he took, one second, Joachim. He took Joachim and he made him king. And this Joachim, he became like a vassal to Egypt, and he had to pay all kinds of taxes, and Jewish sovereignty was compromised. It was on the way out. And he ruled for 11 years. He ruled for 11 years, again, as basically a vassal state to Egypt. And then that ends chapter 37. And chapter 24 begins, a new figure is introduced here. That is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, as we will see, because we're finishing the book of Kings tonight, he is the one who is responsible for the destruction of the first temple. But this is his first mention, the beginning of chapter 24. And he comes, of course, he's the leader of a huge empire, Babylonia. And he comes to Israel. And what happens at first, one second. And so along with him came all of these armies. And basically Nebuchadnezzar is now occupying Judah. Yehuda is now being occupied by Babylonia. And it says in the text that at this point, in a certain way, Nebuchadnezzar is the vessel through which God is going to destroy the temple. Already a number of times, God has said, because of all of the evil that has been done, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, even though recently we learned of a number of righteous kings, Chizkiyahu and Yoshiyahu, but in between and before and after were, as it says, very evil in the eyes of God. And so their fate in a certain way is sealed. And that's what the 24th chapter says, is that God is expressing that, especially because of Manasseh, because Manasseh spilled much blood, including his own uncle, Yeshayahu, Isaiah, who he killed, and that we learned about. And so what happened is Joachim dies, and his son takes over, and that's Joachim. It's almost the same word. One is with a mem, and one was a nun. Joachim dies, and Joachim, his son, becomes king. And what happens is that Nebuchadnezzar surrounds the city, besieges it, and this is approximately 8 to 10 years before the destruction of the temple. So this is something many people don't know. They think that Nebuchadnezzar came, destroyed the temple right then. No, he was there already. He was already, in a sense, ruling over Israel. But here, around 8 or 10 years before, he now besieges the city. He wants full control. And what happens is he raids the temple, he raids the palaces of the king, and he began carrying people into exile. Now, this is very important for those of you who attended the series on Maaseh Merkavah. And if you remember, the very first verse of the book of Yechezkel, Ezekiel, he mentions that he was among the exiles when he had this vision called Maaseh Merkavah. And as we learned after the first chapter, from chapters 2 to 11, had all the warnings about the temple is about to be destroyed. God even in a vision brings Yechezkel back to Jerusalem and shows him all of the abominations that are occurring. And all of this is hinted to in this verse right here. Here, Nebuchadnezzar, again, it's around 8 years before the destruction of the temple, but he begins the exile. And it says that he took away the warriors, he took away the Kohanim, he took away the officers and the craftsmen. And it says he only left the very, very poor. In other words, this was already the beginning of the exile, before the destruction of the temple. And Yechezkel was among them. But here we see the source of it. This is the source because Yechezkel comes in the order of reading the Tanakh. It comes after this. And so here, everyone is taken away except the very poor. The very, very poor are left. And now we already had a case where the Pharaoh of Egypt appoints a king. Now Nebuchadnezzar appoints a king. There's still poor people there, and Nebuchadnezzar wants taxes. And for his troops, they need food. And so the poor people were there to grow food so Nebuchadnezzar could have food for his troops. And so here he appointed Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu is now going to be the last king before the destruction of the temple. And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And here he has to pay all these taxes, and he's subservient to Nebuchadnezzar. But in the 9th year of his reign, in other words, he ruled for 11 years. In the 9th year of his reign, he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. And he, for whatever reason, he couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to return sovereignty to Israel. He thought he could defeat Nebuchadnezzar in war. For whatever reason, he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. And this is starting the events that lead up to the destruction of the first temple. And so here it says that Nebuchadnezzar made a siege wall all around the city. The city itself was walled, but now he built a siege wall. No one could come in, no one could come out. And we read in the book of Lamentations from Jeremiah, the terrible suffering that was going on. And so here it says in the 3rd verse, this is right towards the end. And it says, on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city reached a critical point. And it said, and there was no bread for anyone. And then it says, and a breach was made in the city, and the men of war fled by night because the walls had now been breached. And so here we have to look at Jewish history. That here it says on the 9th day of the 4th month. The 4th month is Tammuz. According to tradition, we have a fast day on the 17th of Tammuz. The 17th of Tammuz is not mentioned here. What is mentioned, though, is the 9th of Tammuz. And so here, and then first it says that the starvation became like unbearable on the 9th day. And then the next verse says, and then they broke through the walls. So according to tradition, that was on the 17th. And if you read the book of Lamentations, Eicha, which we read on Tisha B'Av, and we read the keynote, and we look in the Gemara, so they tell about that the famine, the starvation became so extreme that people were literally eating their children. Many of the children had died from starvation, and now they literally had nothing to eat. And so that's the 9th day of the 4th month. But on the 17th, they broke through. And to this day, that is the fast day of Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. And according to tradition, it took 3 weeks for them to fight from the breaking of the walls to get to the temple. In other words, people were fighting to their last breath to try to save the temple. So then it says that while this is happening, so Tzidkiyahu tries to escape. And the way he tries to escape is that he was shown a cave in Jerusalem that reached all the ways to Jericho, meaning one cave system. And so he and his family tried to escape, and they went through this cave, and they traveled all the ways down to Jericho. You'll pardon me, but I didn't look at the exact measurement, but it's I'm just guessing it's approximately 15 miles, maybe even a little bit more, all one cave system. So he was in the, call it the bowels of the earth, from Jerusalem to Jericho. And what happened was he reached to Jericho, but it turned out that there were Babylonian guards that happened to have been in the opening of the cave system in Jericho. And they understood that this was the king trying to escape. And he was captured, and he was bound in chains. They blinded him. They poked out his eyes, and he was taken to Babylonia. And we'll see at the very, very end, he was jailed there for 37 years. They didn't kill him, but they kept him jailed for 37 years. And then it says And in the 5th month, this is very, very important, the 8th verse of chapter 25, it says that in the 5th month of this, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, they burned the house of God. So here also we need to understand the 5th month. We already discussed the 17th day of Tammuz, the 4th month. Well, we know that we have these 2 fast days, the Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, and the 9th of Av. And it's 3 weeks. And all inclusive, it's actually 22 days altogether. But here it says on the 7th day, they burned the house of God. So it's explained, the commentaries explain, well, if this says the 7th day, why are we commemorating the 9th day of Av? And the reason is they explain that, again, it took almost 3 weeks for them to get to the breached walls of Jerusalem to the temple. So apparently on the 7th of Av, they raided the temple, and for 2 days they looted it. They took out all the gold and silver and copper and anything of value. And towards the 9th day, towards the end of the 9th day, it was set on fire. And most of the temple burned on the 10th day. And so there was actually a disagreement when they set the fast day. Should it be on the 9th of Av or the 10th of Av? The 9th of Av is because that's when the actual destruction began. Before that, like I said, for 2 days they were looting the temple. But on the 10th is when most of the temple actually burned. So there was a discussion. Should we commemorate the 9th or the 10th? And in the end, they decided on the 9th. There's a principle that says everything goes after the beginning. And so since the fire began on the 9th, so they set the 9th of Av as the fast day. But I wanted to explain all of that because here, if you look in the text, there are questions that we needed to answer. One about Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and one about Tisha B'Av. And there's a discussion whether they meant to burn the temple, and I think this is more a discussion of the second temple, that it might have been that it was, as it were, an accident. In other words, whether it was the Babylonians or the Romans, they took over the temple, they looted it, killed almost everyone in Jerusalem, but it was a question whether they meant to burn it down or just keep it and use it as their own idol worship. But in the end, whether they meant it or not, both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And then the text just describes how they looted the temple, they burnt it, and then they took away virtually everyone else that they hadn't killed, who they hadn't exiled already. But again, it says that they left the very, very poor there in order that because if there was no one there, well, what are the Babylonians going to rule over? You have to have food. You have to have someone paying the taxes. And so he left all of the poor. And then it says, we're in the very last chapter, the very last verses. In the 22nd verse of chapter 25, it says that he appointed Gedaliah as governor of Yehuda. Now, again, there's hardly anyone left. The Jerusalem has been basically destroyed. Nonetheless, Nebuchadnezzar wanted someone to rule over. So he appoints, we usually refer to him as Gedaliah. But in the text, he's called Gedaliah. And he's Jewish, of course. And he becomes not king, but governor of what is left of Yehuda. Gedaliah ben Achikam. So what happened is the following, is many of the Jews who could escape, not just at the end, many people saw the writing on the wall, just like many of the people from the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom saw the writing on the wall when Assyria came and took away the 10 tribes, and they escaped to the southern kingdom. That's why, even though we're primarily from the tribe of Yehuda, and I'll just mention in passing that until the Megillat Esther, we were known as Hebrews, Ivrim. That's what Avram HaIvri, when Yosef was in jail, he was referred to as an Ivri. The term Yehudim, Yehudi, only starts from Mordechai in Megillat Esther. That's the first time it's used. Mordechai HaYehudi, which literally means Mordechai, the one from Judah. So many of the Jews had escaped to the surrounding countries, Moab, Ammon, Edom. And now that Gedaliah is governor, and it looks like Nebuchadnezzar is like finished with destroying everything he could. So they started coming back with the hope we can reconstitute whatever's left of a Jewish homeland. And so they came back, and Gedaliah is now the governor, doing his best. And what happens is the king of Ammon didn't like this, didn't like the idea that Jews would be able to reconstitute some kind of power, sovereignty, rulership in Israel. And so he sent, his name was Yishmael. His name was Yishmael ben Netaniah. And he came with a delegation. And Gedaliah was warned that this delegation, there's a good chance they're not up to anything good. And Gedaliah, for whatever reasons, did not accept their warning. He felt that everything would be fine and he would be able to negotiate with them because they would be sent by the king of Ammon. And what happens is that Yishmael assassinated Gedaliah. And on the third day of Tishrei, we have a fast day called Tzom Gedalia. Now, some people actually think that he was actually assassinated on Rosh Hashanah, but we don't have fast days on holidays. And so, and Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. And so it was pushed off until the 3rd of Tishrei, the day after Rosh Hashanah. And in the prophet Zechariah, it mentions 4 fast days that have to do with the destruction of the temple. And in Zechariah, it's called the fast of the 4th, the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th. The 4th is what we learned tonight, Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, when the walls of Jerusalem were breached. The 5th is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. Av is the 5th month. The 7th is Tzom Gedalia, and the 10th is Rosh Chodesh, it is the 10th of Tevet. That's when, I didn't mention it, when we said that Nebuchadnezzar built a siege wall around Jerusalem. So the very first verse of the 25th chapter, I'm going back, it says that in the 9th year of Tzidkiyahu's 11-year reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar came and he camped and laid siege around Jerusalem. So that's the 10th of Tevet. So chronologically, the 10th of Tevet is actually really the first of the 4 fasts commemorating the destruction of the temple. Even though in Zechariah it's mentioned 4th, 5th, 7th, and 10th, because that's in the order of the months of the year. But chronologically, it's really the 10th, the 4th, the 5th, and the 7th. And that's why there's a halacha. We don't fast on a holiday, as we just said, or Shabbat. And before we had a set calendar, the 10th of Tevet could have fallen out on Shabbat. And the sages said, if the 10th of Tevet falls out on Shabbat, we fast, even though it's Shabbat. And the reason is, as I mentioned before, this idea that everything goes after the beginning. So really the beginning of the end, which took 3 years, from the time that Nebuchadnezzar came and started to build the siege wall until the temple was burned was 3 years. But it began on the 10th day of the 10th month. That's when it was considered. It's even mentioned in the text. And so these are the 4 fast days. But then the question is asked, well, the fast for Gedalia didn't have to do with the destruction of the temple per se. This happened afterwards. And it didn't have to do with the temple. So why are we fasting? In other words, if you look at all of Jewish history, there have been so many calamities, so many tragedies. What was so important about this one person who was assassinated, Gedalia? And they give 2 answers. And that is that after Gedalia was assassinated, virtually all the Jews of Israel left out of fear, because they understood that Ammon had set up this assassination. And they felt they just weren't safe anymore. There were very few Jews left anyways. Though I have to mention, there has never been a time that there weren't some Jews in Israel. But the vast majority after the assassination of Gedaliah left Israel and they went to Egypt. They were like desperate. They didn't know where else to go. So they went to Egypt. There was the smallest of small remnants left. And it was considered that that was like the final blow to Jewish sovereignty. In other words, from the time we came into Israel at the time of Yeshua to the destruction of the temple is almost 1,400 years. Now, the United States is about to celebrate 250 years. We're talking about 1,400 years, which is only around a third of Jewish history. So we can see the span of time here. But with the death of Gedaliah, so that was the end of Jewish sovereignty. And at the time, no one knew if it would even be renewed. And that brings us to the whole story of Purim, because eventually Persia took over from Babylonia. And approximately 70 years later, Jews began to return to Israel. But at the time, it was like, this is like the end. What's going to happen now? So that's why the fast day of Gedaliah was included in the other three that were for the destruction of the temple. Okay, so now the last few verses of the book of Kings, it says that in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, that at that time Bavel was ruled by evil Moradach, and he, for some reason, decided to free the king. And the book ends, it's almost a bit of a strange ending, but there's a reason for it, is that he freed him. And it says he was very nice to him. And he set his throne. It's as if he reestablished him as king of Israel, even though it was just a formality. And remember, he had been blinded, and it says that he ate at the table of the king, and the king gave him a continual allowance for the rest of his life. And that's how the book ends. That's how the second book of King ends. So the question is, what are we learning from this? And so it's just like a glimmer of hope. Here we end with the destruction of the temple, the exile of the people, the last attempt at any sovereignty with Gedaliah is also finished. But here in the depth of exile, the king who had been kept in jail for 37 years is freed, and he's given honor, and he is taken care of. And so, strangely enough, the book ends, as it were, on not a high note, that's for sure, but some hope that even after all of this, there still is a remnant. And really from here, historically, we move into the story of Purim, which of course is in in 2 days. So we have finished the second book of Kings. We have finished Yoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim. I even lost track how long we've been learning. At least a year, maybe 2 years. I'll have to look it up. But many of you here live, and many of you who will be watching this afterwards, have gone through this whole process. And I thank you very much. I did an enormous amount of research for which I'm so grateful, because many people don't really delve into some of these books that we went through, or some of the stories are known very superficially, but we had a chance to really delve into these different personalities, the different stories, the paradoxes, the psychological attempt to understand the times and who these people were. And so I'm grateful to all of you. I'm grateful to Hashem, who gave us the stamina to go through all of these books. But we're not finished. We're not finished. And that is because, as I said, in the tractate of Sanhedrin, there's a wealth of information about 3 specific kings, but really about the whole time frame that they lived in. So we're going to start, and it will probably be a week or 2. And then this series will have come to its conclusion, and we will see what comes next. So here we're going to start. Anyone who wants to look it up now or later. Excuse me. I mentioned that there's approximately 20 straight pages in the Tractate of Sanhedrin. It's the 11th chapter. It's called Chelek, a portion. It is the longest stretch of what's called a Gadata in the entire Talmud. 20 pages. A Gadata are the stories, the parables, the traditions, the allegories, the mysticism. So much of it is here. For those who did Maseh Merkavah, we saw probably the most mystical section is in Chagiga. And there it was about 4 or 5 pages. But here it's 20 straight pages. And the 3 main topics are the world to come, the resurrection of the dead, and the Messianic era. That's the 3 main topics. But of course, all kinds of stories get mixed in. So it's called Chelek because the first subject that is introduced in the Mishnah, and this is in the Gemara, it's on 90a. 90a of the Gemara is the Mishnah. And again, we're not going to go through these 20 pages, but I am going to try to pick out specifically teachings about 3 of the kings. I'm going to see right now why. So the Mishnah begins like this: Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek. Again, that's why it's called Chelek. All of Israel has a portion, la'olam haba, in the world to come. Shneamar, v'amei kulam tzadikim, your people are all righteous. Le'olam yerushu eretz, they will forever inherit the land. Ma'aseh yadai lehitpa'er. Excuse me, Netzer Mata'ai, Ma'aseh yadai lehitpa'er. They will forever inherit the land. They are the branch of my planting, my work, my handiwork, in which I take pride. Now, so this statement is used in Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers. This, by tradition, people learn it. Some learn it every Shabbos, but specifically between Pesach and Shavuot, people learn it. There are 6 chapters, and there's 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot. But when you get to the first Shabbat, that's when you start. And every chapter has this statement that all of Israel has a portion of the world to come. But look what happens here, though. But then the Mishnah says, but the Elu she'ein lehem chelek olam haba. It begins by saying every Jew has a portion in the world to come. And according to tradition, every righteous non-Jew has a place in the world to come. But there are exceptions. And I'm not going to go through all of the exceptions here, but towards the end of the Mishnah, it says like this: Shlosha malachim va'arba hediyot ein lehem chelek l'olam haba. Again, there's a list of different people, who don't have a place in the world to come based on different things that they have done, different activities or sins that they were involved with, or attitudes or beliefs. Like the first one is someone who does not, actually the second one is someone who doesn't believe that the Torah is divine. According to the Mishnah, that person does not have a place in the world to come. But here it says, Shlosha malachim va'arba'a, I'm sorry, one second. Va'arba'a hediyot ein lehem chelek olam haba. 3 kings and 4 commoners do not have a place in the world to come. Who are the 3? Yeruvam, Achav, and Menashe. That's why we're going to be learning this. These are the 3 kings. Now, for months now, we've been learning about the different kings, and the majority of them, it says that they did evil in the eyes of God. But they're not all listed here. But these 3 are listed that they have no place in the world to come. But then Rabbi Yehuda says, Menashe, yesh lo chelek l'olam haba. The king Menashe, he does have a place in the world to come. Why? What is his proof? And here he brings, and this is, we learned, this whole incident is not mentioned in the book of Kings. It is mentioned in the book of Chronicles. And we learned this, that at one point, Menashe was taken captive to Babylonia. And there it says that he pleaded to God. And this is what Rabbi Yehuda says. It says, Shenemar v'yitpalel elav, that he prayed to God, but Yishma, and God heard him, and God heard Techinato, his plead, v'yashivhuhu Yerushalayim l'malchuto, and he returned him to Jerusalem to being king. And the book of Chronicles says explicitly, remember, Manasseh ruled for 55 years, the longest of any king. The closest, really, David ruled for 40 years, and Shlomo ruled for 40 years. But Manasseh ruled for 55 years, approximately a little bit before the middle, in the I don't remember exactly, the 22nd or 23rd year of his reign is when he was taken captive. And there he pleaded to God, and he somehow negotiated with the king of Babel, and he was returned to be the king of Israel. And in the book of Chronicles, it says that he did tshuva. He changed his ways, and he tried to get the people to change their ways. And he turned against idol worship, and he removed idol worship from the land. So Rebbe Yehuda says, why would you say he has no place in the world to come? The book of Chronicles says specifically he did tshuva, God listened to him, he went back and he changed his ways. And so the sages answer him, L'malchuto heshivu. He was returned to being the king, v'lo l'chai olam haba heshivu. But God did not return to him his portion in the world to come. Now, we're gonna learn about this, but on the surface, it seems to run against the grain of Judaism, because in the book of Chronicles, he did tshuva, and not for just a day or two. For the last approximately 30 years of his reign, he was a good king, a decent king. But what we're going to learn is the amount of evil he did in the first 22 years kind of caught up with him. And the sages were not so quick to just wipe out what he had done. And if you remember what we learned, that he spilled so much blood in Jerusalem that it ran, and the expression was from peh to peh, from one side of Jerusalem to the other, was running with rivers of blood that Manasseh had spilled, including the most famous one was his own uncle, the great prophet Isaiah. He had him killed. To finish the Mishnah, like we didn't do the whole Mishnah because, again, that's not the purpose right here. Then the question is, who are the four commoners who have no place in the world to come? So they say Bilam. And so you could ask, well, Bilam wasn't even Jewish. But as we said, according to tradition, a righteous non-Jew has a place in the world to come. So Bilam has no place in the world to come. And then there are two advisors. We learned about them way back in the book of Shmuel, two advisors of King David. And that was Doeg and Achitophel. These are two advisors of David who turned against him. And they're listed here. And the fourth one is Gehazi. If you'll remember, Gehazi, he was the servant of Elisha. And he went against Elisha's back, and he tried, we wouldn't say he stole, but he tricked Naaman. If you remember, Naaman was the general in Damascus, and he had leprosy. And he came to Elisha, and Elisha cured him, and he wanted to give him all kinds of riches, and Elisha refused to take anything from him. And then Gehazi kind of pretended that he was being sent by Elisha to get some of these riches. And Elisha found out, and it wasn't good. So he is the fourth one. So here, I think this would be a good place to stop, because once we get in it, there's a certain flow that we have to establish. But give me 1 second. You know what? I will do one here. This is a very, very interesting one. Anyone who wants to look it up, this is on 101A. So this is a story. In the beginning, it will be like, what does this have to do with what we're learning? But you'll see the connection shortly. So Rabbi Eliezer, one of the greatest of the sages, he had fallen ill. And so four of his students came to visit him, to visit the sick. Rabbi Tarfon, all of these very, very famous sages in their own right. Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. And so the first three, to save time here, the first three are praising Rabbi Eliezer. And they all say the same thing, but they use different metaphors. And the message is that not only did you help us in Olam Hazeh, but you helped us acquire the world to come. You're our teacher, and you gave us the merit to receive a beautiful portion in the world to come. So, for example, the first one is Rabbi Tarfon, and he says, you are better for Israel than even rain. Why? Rain helps us have sustenance in this world, but you have helped us acquire the world to come. So you're better than rain. The next one says, you're better than the sun. The sun gives heat and gives light, but it only rules in the day, in this world. But you have given us the merit for the world to come. And then the last one, Elazar ben Azariah, says, you are better than even a father and a mother. A father and a mother brought us into this world, but you are bringing us in the world to come. And then it was Rabbi Akiva's turn. Rabbi Akiva says, precious are sufferings that you are going through. And Rabbi Akiva's contemporaries are like shocked. Like here, we're trying to cheer up Eliezer, who's extremely ill, and you come and say, precious are sufferings, with the implication because they are an atonement for you. And so Rabbi Eliezer, who of course understood how great Rabbi Akiva is, he says to the others, help me stand up. I want to hear what Rabbi Akiva is trying to get at. And so So he says like this. He says like this, I'm just explaining a verse. What is the verse? It says, Ben Shtem Esrei Shana Menashe b'Malko v'Chamishim v'Chamesh Shana Malach b'Yerushalayim v'Yas Hara b'Einei Hashem. So he says to Rabbi Eliezer, precious are your sufferings. And how is he proving it? He says, Menashe was 12 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 55 years, and he did evil in the eyes of God. And then Rabbi Akiva says, but it's written elsewhere that in the book of Mishlei, this is something we discussed, that even though by tradition we understand that Shlomo HaMelech wrote 3 books, the Song of Songs, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Kohelet, Mishlei, and Shir HaShirim. But in the book of Mishlei, it says explicitly, and that's the verse that Rabbi Akiva brings, Gam Eila Mishlei Shlomo Asher Hatiku Anshe Chizkiah Melech Yehuda. It says explicitly that these proverbs were written down by Chizkiyahu and his associates. Now remember, Chizkiyahu is the father of Menashe. And so Rabbi Akiva continues, and he says, is it possible that Chizkiyahu HaMelech, who is writing down Shlomo HaMelech's Torahs, and we know from tradition was a great Torah scholar, is it possible that he didn't teach his own son Torah? How can we even think that? And this is something that we've mentioned a number of times, that it's like really beyond our total understanding, but we see constantly good kings giving birth to sons who end up being evil kings, and evil kings who end up giving birth to those who will become righteous kings. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, can it be that Menashe wasn't taught by his father? He wasn't taught Torah? How do we understand this? So he says like this. And then we said that he did evil. He became an evil king. But again, we learned in the book of Chronicles that he did tshuva. So Rabbi Akiva then says, well, how did Menashe do tshuva? So he says he was taken captive. He was a captive in Babylonia, and he was transported there in chains. And it says that when he was there, he turned to God, and he prayed, and he pleaded with God, and God heard and returned him, like tshuva, to Yerushalayim, where he became king. So Rabbi Akiva says, from this we learn he came to tshuva through suffering. So he's alluding to Rabbi Eliezer that this is how you should. That's why I said suffering is precious, because it leads a person to do tshuva. And here, interestingly enough, it doesn't actually mention what Rabbi Eliezer's response to this was. But we assume that when he said, pick me up, let me hear what Rabbi Akiva is trying to tell me, I think we can assume that Rabbi Eliezer understood what Rabbi Akiva was trying to tell him. In other words, that my colleagues are praising you to high heaven. I also praise you to high heaven. You're my teacher. But when I see you suffering, I see that in a certain way you can turn it around. This is the story of Purim, Na'afochu, that these sufferings are there for a reason. And it was almost like Rabbi Akiva was blessing him, take advantage of these sufferings in order to, if you have to clean your slate, then this would be a time to do it. Let your sufferings be an atonement, not a reason for depression or sadness or giving up or loss of faith. Take the suffering as a sign that it can lead to something very precious. And in a certain way, that's how Rabbi Akiva was blessing him. So obviously, I brought this because of Menashe. This is just the first of many, many, many stories that we will hopefully learn about Yeruvam, Achav, and Menashe. I'll take this opportunity. Of course, those who are staying for the discussion group, we will discuss it, but everyone knows awesome things are happening right now, beyond awesome. And we can only pray that this Purim, we see a total na'afochu. We see already there's so many miracles and wonders, but also that we pray that God will protect Israel. It is not a simple time. There's a lot of danger in the air. We need divine protection, and may everyone have a joyous Purim, and may we see Nisim v'Niflaot this Purim.